think the point to underline, Danny, is how much of the internet, from cloud storage documents to banking apps to the newspaper apps that I've just mentioned, is underlined and built on this AWS technology. It is a hugely widespread and important company. I read that I think it's about 1,000 services have been hit by this. That's a huge number.
Many of the world's biggest websites and apps, including Amazon, Zoom, Snapchat, and the HMRC, are experiencing blackouts due to issues with Amazon Web Services, or AWS as it's known. AWS is the world's largest cloud computing provider. It says most of its services are slowly recovering. But let's get an update on what's going on with Charlotte Henry, who's journalist, author and broadcaster who covers tech, culture and sports issues. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hi, good to be with you. I'm glad we can talk, actually. Everything's just about online, so we can talk.
Well, explain to me how this has happened. Actually, before you do that, can you explain to people what AWS does? Maybe people will be wondering, what's Amazon got to do with with things like Zoom or Snapchat?
Right. So AWS is this huge, powerful service. It's a cloud provider, and it underlines so many of, well, you just listed some of the huge services and important services that are built on AWS servers. There are streaming services that use it, Snapchat, there's all sorts of things. So it's part of the sort of Amazon Death Star, if you like, of services. I mean, there's some stat I read once that if AWS was spun off into its own company, it would still be one of the biggest companies in the world. So this is a really fundamental firm to the web's infrastructure.
Okay, so have you got an idea, do we know yet how this has happened?
I don't think we do know. I know that they sent in engineers to try and work this out. I would imagine we'll get a fairly detailed report in not too short order, but they're obviously, the most important thing is making sure things work at the moment.
Okay, so I think people will have two concerns about their own data. The first, obviously, will be banking outages.
Right.
People are saying some of their cards have been declined. If you've got all your banking online, how much trouble are you in?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, as I say, they're getting the things are getting back online, but there may have been a point where you can't make transactions or go in and check your balance. In the US, Venmo is hugely popular, and that seems to be affected. So people couldn't send money back and forth, perhaps Robinhood as well. So financial apps have been implicated, and this kind of goes to a deeper problem, right? Is that we're so dependent on a relatively small number of services to keep the show on the road, and this is a real exposure of that vulnerability.
Do you think people will be vulnerable if they've got their documents online?
I don't think we've heard of that, but again, it all depends on where you're storing stuff. I mean, I haven't experienced a problem, for example, with your Microsoft documents or things like that, but it's more these fundamental services that seem to have been the problem, and I think some of the streaming services were hit. I think I was reading about this in the Wall Street Journal, and they said they'd had a problem with it. So I think the point to underline, Danny, is how much of the internet, from cloud storage documents to banking apps to the newspaper apps that I've just mentioned, is underlined and built on this AWS technology. It is a hugely widespread and important company. I read that I think it's about 1,000 services have been hit by this. That's a huge number.
Are we vulnerable now as a society to very high levels of criminal and possibly foreign government intervention in our daily services? If we're so dependent upon a service that could simply go down and stop much of what we do working, are we now a supremely vulnerable society? And if we are, what can any of us as individuals do about it?
Well, of course, I think the short answer to your first question is yes, we are vulnerable. Look at what's happened this morning, that within a number of hours, huge sections of the web collapsed because some data centers on the US East Coast, something that we don't really know yet, has gone wrong. The truth is, this is not a problem that individuals can deal with. This is a fundamental infrastructure issue that has happened this morning. It is not like, using a password manager and VPNs to protect your data or something like that. This is a fundamental infrastructure problem, and a problem in that we are reliant relatively on a small number of companies to keep the internet show on the road, or keep these services at least on the road.
Have you got any advice for listeners as to how they can make themselves a little bit less vulnerable?
Well, I don't think this is an individual issue. And, if you're building a company, you might want to think about how you distribute your cloud services. But as individuals, if this kind of problem happens, there isn't much we can do, because it's at such a fundamental level. These are the foundations of these web services. So for you and I, there isn't much as individuals we can do.
Well, Charlotte Henry, who's a journalist with a specialty in tech and culture and sport, thank you very much indeed for joining us.